One of the predominant features of pop songwriting is brevity, the idea that a song should never overstay its welcome. This comes easily to the psychedelic pop band Mamalarky. Short-form song structures are indeed well suited for the band's playful lo-fi aesthetic. And yet, there are always a few really clever harmonic ideas in every song, which gives each of them a solid foundation and a clear identity. It Hurts, from their aptly titled 2022 album Pocket Fantasy, is one such song. Let's take a listen. I should point out that this song's arrangement, like most others on the album, is highly layered, with multiple guitars, keyboards, and pads all contributing to the overall gestalt of the harmony. For the sake of clarity, I've combined these voices into single chords that hopefully capture the harmony's most important features. But be aware that these interpretations are not always strictly accurate to the song's many details. In any case, the intro to It Hurts repeats a very simple phrase based on two chords. The first chord is a B minor seventh, and it pretty clearly serves as this section's tonal center. The second chord is a little more cryptic. At face value, it sounds a lot like an A sharp major seventh chord, with the E natural serving as a sharp 11 extension, although this chord would not make much sense from a functional harmony standpoint. Fortunately, it is actually pretty common to see other interpretations of this chord shape. For instance, if we play a C in the bass, then it serves as the upper structure for a C dominant 9 add 13 chord. Likewise, if we play a G in the bass, then the overall effect is a G minor 6 add 9 chord. But in this case, I think the best interpretation is to root the chord in F sharp, producing an F sharp dominant 7 sharp 9 flat 13 chord. This is a pretty spicy chord for an indie pop song, but it does serve a clear harmonic function. The F sharp 7 is the 5 dominant 7 to the B minor's 1 minor. And after all, this chord change is clearly driven by the release of tension in this tritone, so it makes sense to place the tritone in the context of a dominant chord, where such a function would be conventional. After this section, we proceed to the first verse, which goes like this. Overall, this is a pretty standard diatonic chord progression. But the most striking thing about this section is that we are now abruptly in the key of A minor, with not one but two fewer sharps than the intro's key of B minor. This furnishes the verse with a dark melancholy sound, but how exactly did Mamalarky navigate this key change? It seems like moving from an F sharp 7 to this A minor chord would produce a strong dissonance that is at odds with this song's mellow feel. But as it turns out, the flexibility of this chord shape helps to smooth things over. In the context of this transition, I think you could actually interpret it as a B flat major 7 sharp 11. Note how the A sharp and B flat are enharmonically equivalent. This interpretation gives us a flat 2 to 1 minor chord change, a pretty common borrowing from the Phrygian minor scale, which, with only one additional flat, is not far from our key of A minor. Overall, the double meaning of this chord covers up the dissonance of this modulation, though it also produces a somewhat anticlimactic sound. We expect the tritone of this putative F sharp 7 to resolve strongly to the B minor, but instead it sort of dissolves into this dark Phrygian setting in A minor. I also want to highlight how this major third moves down a semitone to a minor third. The sound of this movement can be very characteristic of the Phrygian mode. And even though we quickly revert to the A natural minor scale, with a B natural instead of a B flat, those same intervals appear prominently in other chords in this song. For instance, they show up in the F major 7th and E minor chords, albeit in the reverse order. But more importantly, they help navigate the transition to the chorus. The beginning of the chorus mirrors the chords used in the intro, and so we end up with a rather abrupt change from F major 7th to B minor. This is a pretty bold way to modulate back to our original key. Adding back those two sharps leads to an unexpectedly bright sound, with the melody even landing on the non-chord tone of C sharp to emphasize this. Furthermore, the transition occurs over the final odd measure of the verse, which makes it feel even more sudden. But in spite of this, the transition sounds oddly familiar. If you look closely, you'll find that the chords contain the phrase that I highlighted, a major third moving down a semitone to a minor third. This phrase even lands similarly on the 1 chord of our new key. F major 7th is pretty far outside the key of B minor, but if we loop in the G used in the preceding melody, we start to see a vague resemblance to C major, which would give us the same flat 2 to 1 minor change that the verse began with. Overall, the reiteration of this chord change, or at least of this Phrygian phrase, lends a sense of consistency to the transitions in this song. From here, the chorus develops a little further. This B7 serves as a secondary dominant, which pushes us forward to E minor before returning to the original B minor chord. This is a pretty simple addendum, but then the song begins another verse section. There is no pivot chord, just an abrupt change from a B minor to an A minor, the two keys' respective 1 chords. As a result, this transition has an even darker sound than before. But as you might expect by now, Mamalarky has yet another trick to smooth over the transition. At first, it doesn't seem like the secondary dominant was meant to fully tonicize this 4 minor chord, since we return rather quickly to the original presumptive 1 minor chord. But what if we were to consider this from the key of E minor? In that case, the overall chord progression goes 5 dominant 7, 1 minor, 5 minor, 4 minor, an extremely normal diatonic progression. Of course, we don't sit in this key forever. As the verse continues, its chords still strongly imply a key of A minor. But in some sense, we can think of this E minor chord as providing a point of reference that mediates this overall modulation. The key of E minor is, after all, directly in between the keys of B minor and A minor in the circle of fifths. Overall, the techniques used for the modulation so far have given It Hurts an evocative sense of darkness and brightness. Yet for all its variety, this song has also stuck entirely to the minor aspect of its diatonic keys, letting these modulations play out with an unchanging air of subdued melancholy. But now, as we move through another verse and chorus, we take an alternate path, starting on the chorus's B dominant 7th chord. Of course, we could continue to interpret this in the key of B minor, with the chords functioning as a 1 minor, 4 minor, flat 7, flat 3 progression. But this is equivalent to a much more satisfying progression in the B minor's relative major key, D major, 6 minor, 2 minor, 5, 1. The result is bright sounding in a completely different way from the earlier A minor to B minor modulation. It doesn't add sharpened notes to the key, but instead reframes the existing key center to its major aspect. This 6-2-5-1 progression is also extremely commonplace in pop music, and no doubt a sense of familiarity enhances this section's uplifting mood. After 2 repetitions of this progression, it develops into a brief bridge section using a simple 2-chord pattern. In the key of D major, these chords serve as a 1 and a flat 7. Voicing both of these chords as major 7ths also highlights that they do not belong to the same key. As it turns out, these 2 chords are the relative major chords of B minor and A minor, which of course serve as the song's 2 main key centers. So the movement between the D and the C acts as sort of a microcosm of the chorus and the verse, translated into a major key. This gives the bridge a similar flavor to these other sections, albeit with a brighter, happier sound to it. But there is one other subtle difference. The bridge's melody preserves the F sharp throughout, in contrast with the F natural you'd see in the key of A minor or C major, meaning this C chord is actually borrowed from G major. Perhaps it's better, though, that the 2 salient keys in this section are closer together on the circle of fifths. This back and forth modulation is more direct than what we've heard elsewhere in the song, with no crafty techniques put in place to smooth out the effect of the chord change, so making the key change smaller ensures the effect is still mild and approachable. At the end of the bridge, the song hangs on a C major 7th chord before returning to the verse section, starting on the C's relative minor, A minor. From here, the verse repeats as before. But then, at the very end of the song, there is one more clever idea which serves as a brief outro. Here we see the B-flat major 7th chord making a reappearance. As we saw before, the somewhat dark key of A minor borrows it from the even darker A Phrygian scale. But then, abruptly, it changes to a D major 7th chord, modulating to the song's brightest major key. Yet even this extreme change of key is oddly agreeable. From the perspective of the key of D major where we end up, the B-flat serves as a flat 6 chord borrowed from the key's parallel minor, D minor. The vocal melody even sustains a D throughout both chords, highlighting these two keys' common root note. This flat 6 to 1 change is actually not that uncommon in pop music, though it tends to be a bit flashy if it's not worked in organically. By the time It Hurts reaches this rousing outro, it has explored seemingly every possible angle to keys that are 2 steps apart on the circle of fifths. It uses numerous techniques to move back and forth between them with varying degrees of suddenness, and of course looks at these features from both minor and major perspectives. This expansively creative approach to developing simple musical concepts is what makes Mamalarky's music so compelling. The fact that so many ideas have blossomed out of a 3.5-minute pop song is testament to their skill. This concludes my music theory analysis of It Hurts. If you have any questions, leave a comment and I'll do my best to explain.